Welcome to the History Bards podcast today. I'm host Dee Marley, and we are thrilled to host historical fiction author Nev March here today on the show. And to introduce Nev to our listeners, Nev March is the first Indian-born writer to win the Minotaur Books Mystery Writers of America First Crime Novel Award for her Edgar finalist debut, Murder in Old Bombay. After a long career in business analysis, she returned to her passion, writing fiction. Nev sits on the New York chapter board of Mystery Writers of America and is a member of Crime Writers of Color. A Parsi Zoroastrian, she lives with her family in New Jersey and teaches occasionally at the Rutgers University Osher Institute. So welcome to the show. How are you today, Nev?
Thank you. I'm doing well. Thank you for having me, Dee.
Sure, absolutely. We are so glad to have you on the show. And can you tell our listeners a little bit more about your journey as a writer and what led you into becoming a historical fiction author?
Absolutely. I have always been interested in writing. I have short stories that started when I was 11. And I wrote all kinds of stuff. I wrote, different genres at the time. Gradually, I think in my 20s, I started writing historical fiction. I hadn't published anything up until, I want to say, my late 40s, actually. I had a corporate career, but I kept writing. It was my secret source of enjoyment. So, yeah, I had 4 unpublished historical manuscripts, 2 of which are clearly historical romance, actually.
Okay.
But I now realize that even though I joined Yahoo groups and so on, I really didn't know the business of publishing, and I didn't have the time. I couldn't invest the time with a family and 2 little kids and a full-time job, a pretty busy, high-pressure job, actually. So eventually, after 25 years in my corporate career, I got laid off and decided, okay, it's time to play.
Time to play.
Time to
I like
play.
that.
Yeah, I kind of felt like I'd earned it.
So your experience.
My husband has to do with that. Yep.
Your experience really relates to a lot of authors and how their careers eventually just lead them right into historical fiction. And it's like there all the time, isn't it?
It is. It is absolutely. I've always been interested in history and family history and community history and so on. So I found I'd actually managed to acquire quite a library, not just of books, but of photographs, of letters, of old, things. And that means that there was some, invisible hand perhaps guiding this. So I started writing when I got laid off, and I had this wonderful critique group that really beat me up, but wonderfully so, because it took my writing to another level. You don't know what you don't know.
Right.
So I'm forever grateful. And really, Mystery Writers of America is that's where everything happened. I put in a little lottery. I entered a contest for unpublished writers that they actually put out every year. They don't actually award a winner every year. It's maybe 3 or 4 years, or whenever they get a book that they want to publish, because MWA is hooked up or is tied with, in partnership with Minotaur for this contest. Right. And so Minotaur is part of Macmillan. Lo and behold, they wanted to publish my first, which was this one, Murder in Old Bombay. And it did extremely well, came out with the second 2 years later. I ended up doing quite a lot of promotion. I have to admit, I did not expect that, but it is such a fun ride. So here's the second that came out in 2021 and 2022. And then this year, just last week, we have the third.
Yay!
The Spanish Diplomat's Secret. So I am just thrilled to have these out, and they follow the journey of a young couple. So it's a lot of fun to write and create and imagine this journey.
Yes, absolutely. So, and we'll get into, I want to ask you, go back to ask you about that whenever you said that you had to do a lot of promotion, but I'll get into that later because a lot of authors don't know that. And that's really something that maybe you could share with our listeners. But first off, we would love to know more about the series and, from your first one to the one that just came out. Can you tell our listeners a little bit more about the premise behind it, the storylines and your characters?
Absolutely. So each book is a mystery and it has a plot and it has a problem to be solved in that book. But there's also an overarching story
Okay.
that has to do with the characters and the relationships and the things they discover really about themselves and about their families and so on. So I started out with this real world unsolved mystery. It's 130 years, and we as a community still don't have the answer.
Oh,
So it's something that I had been told as a teenager that there were these two well-to-do Parsi girls in my own community, and there was a mysterious death where they fell from the top of the Rajabai Tower, which is in the middle of
oh,
Bombay University.
oh, wow.
And it was used as a cautionary tale. You're not safe even in daylight.
Uh-huh.
That's the bottom line. And in India, that is very much the case. In many parts of the world, that is the case for women. But this was a gentle way, perhaps, to warn young women.
Yes.
I felt very constrained by these restrictions when I was a youngster. I remember saying, my brother can go everywhere. He can compete. He has friends. He can be out all hours of the day and night. And here I have such a limited world.
Right.
And it was extremely frustrating for me. So I ended up playing the piano for hours, drawing for hours because I had to be home.
Yeah.
I just was restricted in that way for my own safety.
Right.
But this story, I just never let go of it. So I started out reading a little bit about it and then was astonished to find that the widower, one of the girls was 20 years old, and the husband of the older one was actually, after that horrible event, he went on to become a serial entrepreneur. He created multiple businesses, never remarried. There are no children from him. All his descendants are from his brother and his sisters. But that guy was Ardeshir Godrej. That guy is actually, he's a huge figure in India. This
Okay.
guy he created what is today a conglomerate. It's like one of the largest corporations in Asia.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and the guy was tireless. He believed in India. He believed in Indian independence. He believed in Indian ability to produce. And we're talking about a time when India was extremely poor, and
Yeah.
famines and plagues were decimating the population. So I was fascinated by this guy because of his incredible resilience.
Hmm.
And so I didn't use the name Godrej because those descendants still exist, right? They're busy, they're people. I didn't want to use their name.
Yeah.
It feels a little cheeky to do that and not very nice. So I created a different family because I wanted to solve the darn mystery.
Yeah.
So I created Adi from G, that's the character. And then of course he has to hire a detective. So that's where Captain Jim stepped into the light. I don't know that anyone like that actually existed, but he is based on a number of real world people. And this is where my love of research just blossomed, because
Yeah.
I found stories and photographs and portraits and so much wonderful history, just the stories of these people. Then, of course, about 10%, maybe 15% of the way through the book, Adi has a sister who appears from England. So now I have a
How that always
subplot.
happens.
I have a subplot that I did not plan. I
Right.
didn't plan this subplot, but it sort of took over the book a little bit. And I realized why. Because in the beginning, I had created an Anglo-Indian detective that had a lot of meaning. And I had thought of it as a convenience, really, that, oh, he'll be able to work with the British people because he'll look like them. And then he's Indian, so he has the languages and he'll be able to investigate on the rural side, or the poorer side, or the Indian side. The native people will kind of accept him. It was a convenience. I didn't realize that these things were there in my subconscious. And so because he is Anglo-Indian, he's not accepted socially. He's a pariah, really
Right.
he has no sense of belonging because he hasn't found his tribe. And so in many ways, this journey through the book is not just solving the mystery of why the girls died, and that has a lot of historical implications based upon the time, but it's also him finding himself, him finding a family that accepts him. So I won't give you many more spoilers, but basically,
no, please,
yeah,
no. We
he
want
falls
everybody
in
to read
love with
it.
he falls in love with his clients. Like, this is a no.
Yes.
But it worked out so beautifully. So it's an adventure story. It's a love story, and I enjoyed the characters so much. People have told me that some of their favorite characters in there, like, you have to bring them back.
Oh, yeah.
So this was the first book, and then of course, in the second book, he actually finds his love interest, and he goes to America. So now, in a way, I was trying to create an immigrant sleuth that is discovering things, kind of the outsider perspective, discovering things about his home country, or his new home country. So Peril at the Exposition was intended to be him investigating things in Boston originally. But guess what year it was? It was 1893.
Oh,
and
wow.
the biggest thing in that year was Chicago's World Fair.
Yes, it was.
So I said, yeah, he's going to go off to the Chicago World Fair. And lo and behold, at the end of the first chapter, I realized he disappears. So who's going to tell the story? So I have Diana, and really this is her story, because she would not let go of me. She kept at me to say, I want my story.
Yeah.
So second book is really her story. It's her becoming a detective. It's her finding him. It's her realizing the ugly underbelly of the Gilded Age. It's her trying to come to terms with her new home, because she isn't as happy in America. She was privileged. She was a princess. She was an heiress. And she's given up all that. So finding people that she can find an affinity with or admire, whereas she's a little bit more skeptical, a little bit more disenchanted. And I will tell you that every immigrant almost follows this path of, rosy enchantment. Oh my God, this is so beautiful. The streets are so clean. And then you realize people will enfranchise you. They will discriminate just because of your name. Yeah. All my own personal experiences and mistakes and blunders, some of them are captured in this book. So it was a hard book to write in some ways. Truth is hard, and sometimes facing one's own stupidity is hard. So
that sounds, and go ahead.
Yeah, I enjoyed it all. I wrote it all, and I enjoyed it all. And then of course the third book came out of nowhere.
Yeah. Well, tell us more. Tell us more about the third one, since it just came out.
Yeah, so 1894, they were on a cruise ship, husband and wife, but remember, they're newlyweds. They don't know each other very well. And sometimes we hide things from people that we love because we want them to see the best of us. We want them to see perfection. And of course, we're not. So you have both husband and wife hiding something. And then they're on this ship. And of course, the cruise ships carry transcontinental passengers. You have an international set of passengers there. And then of course, Captain Jim makes friends, but not really friends, but he meets somebody that's a Spanish diplomat, and that guy is killed literally like on the first day, on the second day of the cruise ship. So okay, bad things happen, and he's a detective, but the captain is fretting and tells Jim, you have to solve this before we reach, because if you don't, there could be war. And you have to remember how tenuous the international relations were at the time. Stein was the big guy in the international world. America was the little guy. America did not even have steamships. They had commercial ships, but did not have warships. So we're looking at a very different world at that point. But I wanted to create a locked room mystery. So the guy has been killed and there's no apparent way for the killer to escape. but also it's a closed set mystery. So this is very much a nod to Agatha Christie.
I was fixing to say that because I love Agatha Christie books, so it was making me think of Death on the Nile. So
Yes, 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 so much. And I have borrowed, I will admit totally, I have borrowed from the greats. The first book, Captain Jim is a fan of Arthur Conan Doyle. And then he starts grumbling about how Conan Doyle's mysteries always work out so well. And that the reality of being a detective is not as glamorous.
right.
So here we have him he's still a devotee. I adored. I still read Arthur Conan Doyle's his historical work as well as his Sherlock Holmes books.
Mm-hmm.
But then we have a little shift here because I love having an international cast of characters because that is the world.
Yes.
I think that sometimes Americans are very ethnocentric. We think that only America exists, or it occupies our attention to such a vast degree, whereas really we are just world citizens, and everyone else is as important as us. Scandalous. Yeah, so I have this international cast of characters, and they all have different motives, and meanwhile there are things happening in history that affect individuals. This is a recurrent theme with my books. So we have the Captain Jim going from a very black and white kind of binary focus of innocent and guilty to a sense of shades of gray now that things are more complicated, and sometimes the lack of justice is the hardest thing for human beings to bear. It's the wound that will not heal. And I had that in the back of my mind, so I won't tell you more, but enjoy the book. It is a roller coaster ride.
Well, that sounds
Nonstop.
wonderful, and it definitely has so many shades of Agatha Christie. I can see that very much. Well, very well done. Well, we would love to know a little bit about the research that you had to do. You mentioned that a little bit earlier. So was there anything obscure, maybe a story that you could share with us and that you came across that was like your wow, that's something that we would like to know?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have to tell you, as I researched first trains, because in the first part of the book, chapter 2 or 3, Diana takes a train. So I said, all right, well, how would she actually get from New York to Chicago? And I realized that train wrecks were astonishingly common. You had multiple train companies, lines, and they used the same physical track from different directions.
Oh no.
And this was common. This was common. So horrifying. And some of the photographs are up there on Pinterest, and I just mine all these different resources, of course wiki and the historic record and books and so on, but just, and even Pinterest. I mean, there are old photographs maintained. So really quite shocking how frequent there were and the number of casualties. And then I started looking at because for this book, for the third book, the train travel is in Peril at the Exposition, book 2. Here I started looking at cruise ships, and again, lo and behold, horrific number of ships sinking and cutting each other off, shearing each other.
Yikes.
So apparently, as I chose these two, I read a lot of lovely, stories and horrendous stories too about different ships. The sizes got larger and larger as the years progressed. But this is still very early on in terms of commercial sea travel. This was the only way to get there before planes. So the Umbria and the Etruria are sister ships. And I started looking at their history and the captains that piloted them and the adventures they had. So there were single screws. This is one single propeller. There are massive boilers where these, on top you have these wonderfully dressed people that are enjoying wonderful meals. And then in the belly of the ship, you have the stokers and the boilermen who are sweating, and they have 4-hour shifts in the belly of the ship, and they're hauling coal into the fires to furnaces to heat boilers. And the boilers are really just turning a single screw, a propeller. And frequently that propeller broke and left them stranded in the middle of the ocean. So there are stories about how high speed, so this was a big thing in the turn of the previous century, that high speed caused accidents in fog. I can just imagine, this is like, car wrecks today. If you're driving too fast in a fog, you are in trouble.
Yes.
You are asking for trouble. But ships carrying 1,000 passengers. So some of the history that you're asking about is today it seems shocking. We hear about a cruise ship getting stranded on a sandbar, and it makes national headlines. There were far more tragedies, and people did go down.
Wow.
I have to admit, I mean, everyone knows the Titanic.
Yeah.
It was a tragedy beyond tragedies, but there were many, many others that went down.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah,
that's incredibly interesting. It's something that most people wouldn't know. So thank you for sharing that. Well, let me ask you this. Did you was talking earlier a little bit about the difficulty sometimes in writing these stories and everything. So what did you find that was the most difficult?
The hardest part. So I do start out with an outline. My research takes roughly 3 to 4 months. I'm reading everything I can lay my hands on about that time period, and the national events and international events that are going on, but also how people lived and dressed, and things that we might not know of today. And the hardest part for me is I start out with an outline, and then the characters take over. So I have to give them freedom to do that, because it's much harder to try to stick to the outline, and sometimes it just won't come. Like the scene it's not even happening. Forget about hard, it just won't happen. And that is a sort of writer's block. So the solution is really to go back a little bit to something that is already written, and just let the characters tell me the story. And that is hard, I will tell you, because I'm terrified that I'm going to be writing, 6 or 8 chapters or 10 chapters that just will not get used, because this is just, it's just taking off. I'm like, come back.
I think we all understand that.
The detours are there for a reason. I have to trust, and that trust is hard. Maybe we're all control freaks in some fashion. I want to be efficient.
We want to control that little world.
Yes, you do. It's like, it's in my own mind. I should be able to control it.
You would think, right?
You would think, but the mind is a very strange machine.
Yes, it is.
It's very so my entire career was quantitative, right? I did market research, I did analytics, I looked at data and so on. I'm a data scientist. And so leaving this part of my brain to work, this is the right brain, this is the emotional side, this is making connections that are subconscious and not methodical the way I would have worked in my corporate career.
Right.
I mean, you have flashes of insight when you're doing market research as well, where you're looking at something and goes, oh, that came together. Oh, that's why. I enjoyed those moments of creativity in my working career as well. Now, as a writer in my writing career, I need to trust that a lot more. And for me, that is very hard.
Yeah.
So letting go, letting the characters tell me what's going on, and then going back to see the connections so that I can, manually now, this is so strange, but it feels like that part is on automatic. And now I'm moving to, driving with a manual shift, going into, oh, that's why he said that. That's why she said that. This is why he discovered it. Let me draw the line and bring it back. Tying it all together is actually the most fun thing.
Yeah.
I will tell you that revisions are hard. The drafting is the most fun there is. I adore it. It is just addictive, and I can go till 2 a.m. and go, oh my God. If I didn't have a family to remind me to eat, take me for walks, and I'm so indebted to them, because each time they interrupt me, they get a nasty look from me, and I still do it, and I love them for it.
Yeah.
But each time they have to bear that meanness from me, and I feel so bad. But it's because I'm so into this world. Like, don't bring me back. I want to be here. So yeah, thank
which is
God for
actually a really good advice for younger writers starting out. I was going to ask you about that, about advice that you would have, but all of that you just said is great advice for anyone starting out in writing or in historical fiction or in any type of writing.
Yes.
So let me ask you this. Was there any advice that you were giving on along your way of becoming a writer that has stayed with you?
The people who will do well, who will get published, who will write multiple books, are the people who have a thicker skin. It is very hard to get critiques of your work, and just know that anybody who gives you tough critique is giving you a huge gift.
Yes,
you should hug that person.
Yes.
Because it is hard to give critiques, and negative critiques are very hard to give. And people who give genuinely, constructive criticism are to be valued, because that is what levels you up. That is the one thing that you can do, is recognize that they are critiquing the product and not the person.
Yes.
And
that's one of the things
that's
one of the things we strive to do at the Historical Fiction Company with our editorial reviews. We are very conscious of doing that, because it's about helping an author and not, bashing them for something. But we really want to strive to do that. So I really appreciate that you said that, because that's very important. I learned that early on as a young author too, that I didn't have thick enough skin back then.
it
And
is
it
hard.
crushed me. It crushed me.
Yes.
But yeah, now with experience, you definitely get to learn that.
Yes.
So
It is hard.
let me
Go
ask
ahead.
you this: in your in your early days of writing, is there anything that you particularly read yourself that impacted your life or set you on the path to becoming a writer?
One book that I read as a teenager was life-changing, and not just in terms of writing, but in terms of owning my own decisions, actually. And it was Jane Eyre.
Oh, of course.
It is a romance that is very unusual,
Yes.
because she leaves the love of her life. She
Yeah.
leaves him, and because she respects herself.
Yeah.
And that for me was astonishing, because I grew up with Mills and Boone, right? So romances, you just like, you want the fairy tale. Everybody wants the fairy tale, and everybody loves happy endings. But this idea that one has to own one's decisions, one has to make hard decisions, but it's a little bit of self-respect. For me, that was so life-changing. I think I grew tremendously reading that. I reread it later, later in life, and it didn't quite have that same effect. I was like, wow, this is actually Christian fiction, isn't it? It didn't really matter at the time. And I'm not Christian, I'm Zoroastrian. It didn't matter. All of that doesn't matter. It was this idea of self-determination, that you must be true to yourself. And it is hard to explain how that actually clicked. I will tell you, I've loved writers that entertained me, that gave me insight. Raymond Chandler. If I'm miserable, I pick up Raymond Chandler's books, because his beautiful turn of phrase, his deep meaning, his explanation of how people work and how the world works, and frankly, how men work, is very, very insightful. It's just delicious. Dashiell Hammett is a sadder point of view, a world view. Again, one I admire tremendously, but it is a little far removed. It is a little objective and even a little cold to me. I've loved mysteries all my life, but I wanted them to be emotional. I wanted them to be honest, like soul-searingly honest. And so that is really what I aim to do. It is a mystery. Yes, there's a mystery, but there's a level of brutal truths that I strive for. I don't know if I've achieved, but I will someday. Brutal truths that must come out, and it's about oneself. It's about the world. It's about the way things work. But I will tell you that I also have a very positive worldview, and there are authors, beautiful writers that I will not read today, even though I know I'm losing something by that decision, because I believe worldview tremendously matters. What you leave the reader with
Yeah.
is, is serious. It is a huge responsibility. The worldview that you instill from reading that story, and I think that is the biggest responsibility that I carry as a writer. And I think that we should all really pay attention to. We pay attention to the food we put in our mouths, so we must pay attention to the books we put into our heads.
Yeah, that's very, very true. That's very true. That's very profound. Thank you for sharing that. I think we all have books like that. Jane Eyre was one of my favorites too. But my other one that started me out, and you'll appreciate this, was The Far Pavilions. I really loved that book. I read that whenever I was 17 and just picked it up in a library. So that was kind of the book that started me on my journey of historical fiction. So I loved that book.
I read Far Pavilions in one sitting.
Oh my goodness.
That's
hard to do.
Yes, it is. I remember reading it through the night and realizing that it is 6 o'clock in the morning, and I have college. I had college at 8. So I didn't sleep at all. I just went for a shower and I got ready and I went straight to college. I read it in one sitting. It was,
quite a book. It's quite a book, definitely.
Quite a book indeed. I can't do that with Ayn Rand or any of those other whopping, massive books. No. But I will tell you another one that I absolutely adored, and it's American fiction, is Little Women.
Oh, yes.
So my name, Nev March, is a nod to Jo March. She wanted to be a writer.
That's right. That's right.
So Jo March, March comes from Jo March of Louisa May Alcott's Little Women, and Nev actually comes from Neville Shute. He's an English-Australian writer that he wrote stories about the people, about, working class people, about the trials and tribulations of everyday people, not necessarily nobility and all the riches that Henry James was writing about, the privileged few. Neville Shute wrote Trustee from the Tool Room, just that's that title, right? After the Bomb, A Town Called Alice, and many, many more. But these stayed with me. They were foundational books for me.
Yes, absolutely. Well, we'd love to know a little bit more about what you have coming up. Do you have any events or book signings that our listeners should know about?
Absolutely. So on the 23rd, I have 2 in-person appearances. I'm going to be at New Providence at the Saltbox Museum from 9 to 12. And then 1:30, I'm talking at Franklin Lakes Library. I have a slideshow to present, and lots of lovely, beautiful pictures of ships and stories and things, tidbits from my research will be in there. I also have an online Zoom that's coming up with Sujata Massey. She's another marvelous writer about Indian history, and her character, Pervin Mystery, is a Parsi Zoroastrian like I am. And she writes about Pervin Mystery in the 1920s.
Okay.
My books are 30 years prior to that, in the 1890s. Mm-hmm. But we enjoy the camaraderie and the joint journey. So I am so thrilled to be presenting along with Sujata Massey on the 28th.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much. And we'll be sure, and all the listeners out there who are listening, be sure, and if you're in the area, go by and see Nev and get a signed book. And we'll also put her link up on the website so that whenever you're looking for her and you want to find out more information, we'll put that link up as well. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Oh, thank you, Dee. This is such a pleasure.
Absolutely. We're very excited for you and your books, and we wish you much success. And as always, for more information on Nev's books, again, you can click the link in the description or go to her website at nevmarch.com. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, as next week's episode features author Eileen Donovan. Thank you so much to our listeners and viewers. This is Dee Marley. Keep making history and keep listening.